many times does the Lord have to prove himself before we finally believe that he's really with us? Before we finally believe that we can really trust him with our lives completely? We're so slow to learn, and we're even slower to trust. But that puts us in pretty good company, because that has been the story of God's people since the first day that he called them to himself. Throughout the book of Exodus, we've seen God telling Moses over and over again that when I do this, or when I do this, you will know that I'm the Lord. In last week's reading, we saw how he proved that in a big way when he parted the waters of the Red Sea to allow his people to cross over to safety. They knew now, without a doubt, that he is the Lord. But in today's reading, the question on Israel's mind is a different one. The question is not whether or not he's the Lord. The question is the Lord really among us? And you just wonder, how could they question that after everything that they had seen him do? And the answer to that? Well, they can do that because they're a lot like us. Back in chapters 15 and 16, we see that right after they got done celebrating the crossing of the Red Sea, they got out into the wilderness to a place where the water wasn't good to drink, and so they complained. But in his mercy, the Lord provided, and he made a way so that the water was drinkable. A few days later, they complained that they didn't have any food. Again, the Lord showed them mercy, and again, the Lord provided. Then in chapter 17, they come to a place called Rephidim, and it says they couldn't find any water at all. And even though they had just seen the Lord literally part a massive body of water, now they're struggling to believe that the Lord could find them enough water just to drink. They said, Moses, did you bring us out of Egypt just so that we would die of thirst here in the wilderness? And then they asked the real question. They said, is the Lord really among us or not? And the Lord is so patient with them, and the Lord is so patient with us. He tells Moses to strike the rock with his staff, and the Lord miraculously brings water out of the rock, enough to satisfy the thirst of an entire nation. After that, the Amalekites come, and they attack Israel, and the Lord gives them an incredible victory, and it's very, very clear that it is only by the Lord's power that it happened. The Lord showed them time and time and time again that the answer to their question was, yes, the Lord is very much among his people. Chapter 19, he reminds them why he's among his people. He says, you've seen how I delivered you from Israel and how I brought you to myself. And if you obey, and if you keep my covenant, I will bring you to myself as my special possession among all the peoples of the earth. But he didn't do it just so that they could sit and enjoy getting fat, eating all the milk and honey that they could eat in the promised land. He told them that he called them for a purpose, to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. In other words, to be his representatives who would declare his glory among all the people of the earth. It was just like he had told Abraham when he called him in Genesis 3. He said, and in you, all the peoples of the earth will be blessed. Then at Mount Sinai, the Lord comes and he gives them the 10 Commandments, which we'll talk about more next week. But for now, it's important to note that this wasn't just a bunch of rules to follow. It was the heart of what it meant for them to live together as the people of God, the God who was very much among them. And the obedience to his commands wasn't meant to be some kind of burden for them to bear. It's meant to be a response to the mercy and the grace that God continued to show them. Just as Peter says of the church in 1 Peter 2, he says, you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession. And this is why, so that you may declare the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. Peter's saying, you do this because you have received so much mercy. He says, you used to not be a people at all, but now you're the people of God. And in God's mercy, God has proved time and time again throughout the history of his people, in my life and in your life, that he is a God who is very much among his people, and that he is a God who we can trust completely